Marcus Johnson woke up early on a crisp Saturday morning, the sun barely peeking over the horizon. He had always been someone who believed in action, someone who didn't just sit around waiting for change, but went out and created it himself. Growing up in the inner city wasn't easy. There were days when hope felt like a distant dream, buried under piles of trash in neglected parks or drowned out by the noise of sirens echoing through narrow streets. But Marcus wasn't one to give up. Instead, he found ways to make things better, even if it meant starting small. That morning, Marcus had a plan. He wanted to clean up Jefferson Park, a place that held memories for many in his neighborhood. It was where kids played tag after school, where families gathered for picnics during summer weekends, and where older folks sat on benches, sharing stories from their younger days. But lately, the park had fallen into disrepair. Litter scattered. Across the grass, broken bottles glinted in the sunlight, and weeds sprouted uncontrollably along the pathways. Marcus knew something needed to be done, so he decided to take matters into his own hands. He reached out to friends, family, and neighbors, inviting them to join him for a community cleanup event. Some people hesitated at first. They were busy with work or doubted whether their efforts would make any real difference. But Marcus's enthusiasm was contagious. By the time Saturday rolled around, a group of about 15 volunteers showed up, armed with gloves, trash bags, and determination. Among them were teenagers eager to earn community service hours, parents hoping to teach their children the value of giving back, and elderly residents who remembered what the park used to look like decades ago. As they began their work, laughter filled the air. The volunteers divided themselves into teams, each tackling a different section of the park. Marcus led by example, picking up cans and wrappers with steady hands while encouraging others to keep going. "We're making history today," he joked, earning chuckles from those nearby. Even the youngest members of the group got involved, proudly carrying tiny buckets filled with cigarette butts and candy wrappers. For once, the park felt alive, not with chaos, but with purpose. But as the morning wore on, an unsettling feeling crept over Marcus. Something about the day felt off. At first, he couldn't put his finger on it. Then, just as the team was finishing up a large pile of debris near the basketball court, a police cruiser pulled into the parking lot. Its tires crunched against gravel and its siren blared briefly, a sharp, jarring sound that cut through the peaceful atmosphere like a knife. Everyone froze, turning to watch as two officers stepped out of the car. The officers approached slowly, their expressions unreadable behind mirrored sunglasses. One of them, a tall man with broad shoulders, spoke first. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice firm and clipped. Marcus stepped forward, holding up his gloved hands in a gesture of goodwill. "We're cleaning up the park," he explained calmly. "It's a community service project." The officer frowned, glancing around at the group before narrowing his eyes at Marcus. "Do you have permission for this?" he asked, his tone laced with suspicion. Marcus nodded, explaining that he'd coordinated with local authorities ahead of time and even received verbal approval from the city council. Still, the officer didn't seem satisfied. He demanded to see identification, then proceeded to question Marcus further, asking why he was organizing such a large gathering and whether he had ties to any activist groups. Marcus tried to stay patient, answering each question as honestly as possible. But as the minutes ticked by, frustration bubbled beneath the surface. Why was helping his own community being treated as suspicious? Why did these officers assume the worst instead of acknowledging the good they were doing? The other volunteers exchanged worried glances, sensing the tension building between Marcus and the officers. Some of the younger members shifted uncomfortably, clutching their trash bags tighter as if preparing to flee. And then, without warning, another squad car arrived, followed by yet another. Within moments, the peaceful cleanup effort transformed into a scene straight out of a movie. Officers surrounded the group, their presence overwhelming and intimidating. Cameras clicked as curious onlookers began filming the encounter, capturing every word and movement. Someone muttered, "This is ridiculous," under their breath, but no one dared speak too loudly. For Marcus, the situation felt surreal. Here, he was simply trying to improve his neighborhood, and now he was being treated like a criminal. The irony wasn't lost on him, or on anyone else watching. As the confrontation dragged on, hashtags like "doing good while black" started trending online, drawing attention to the absurdity of the moment. People shared stories of similar experiences, highlighting how often black individuals face scrutiny for acts of kindness or leadership. Despite the mounting pressure, Marcus refused to let anger consume him. Deep down, he knew this wasn't just about him. It was about a system designed to doubt and dismiss people who looked like him. And though the outcome remained uncertain, he vowed to stand his ground, proving that doing good shouldn't come with conditions. As the number of police officers grew, so did the tension in the air. What had started as a simple cleanup event was now spiraling into something far more complicated and far more dangerous. Marcus stood at the center of it all, his heart pounding in his chest. The calm demeanor he'd tried to maintain earlier was beginning to crack under the weight of the situation. Around him, the volunteers who had come to help were visibly shaken. Some clutched their trash bags tightly while others whispered nervously among themselves, unsure of what would happen next. The lead officer, whose nameplate read Officer Daniels, continued his relentless questioning. He wasn't satisfied with Marcus's answers and seemed determined to find fault where none existed. "Why are you organizing this?" he asked again, his voice sharp and accusatory. "Who gave you permission, and why do you have so many people here?" Marcus took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "I already told you," he said, his tone measured but firm. "This is a community service project. We're cleaning up the park because it's important to us. I've been working with local officials and everything is above board." But Officer Daniels didn't seem interested in listening. Instead, he turned to one of the other officers and muttered something about checking Marcus's background. Another officer nodded and stepped away, pulling out a radio to relay instructions. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just a routine inquiry, it was an interrogation, plain and simple. And it was clear that the officers weren't treating him like someone doing good. They were treating him like a suspect. Things escalated further when a third squad car arrived, its lights flashing ominously. More officers spilled out, forming a loose circle around the group. Some of them carried clipboards, jotting down notes as if they were investigating a crime scene rather than a peaceful volunteer effort. Others stood with their arms crossed, their faces unreadable behind mirrored sunglasses. The sight of so much authority concentrated in one place sent a wave of unease through the crowd. One of the younger volunteers, a teenage boy named Jamal, couldn't take it anymore. His hands trembled as he held onto his trash bag and tears welled up in his eyes. "Why are they treating us like criminals?" he whispered to no one in particular. "We're not doing anything wrong." An older woman standing nearby placed a comforting hand on his shoulder, but even she looked rattled. Meanwhile, spectators began gathering along the edges of the park. Word had spread quickly about what was happening, thanks in part to social media. People from nearby neighborhoods came out to see for themselves, some holding phones aloft to capture the unfolding drama. Videos of the confrontation went viral, almost instantly sparking outrage online. Hashtags like "Chow doing good while black" and "Azaro community under attack" trended rapidly, drawing attention not only locally but across the country. Despite the growing audience, the officers showed no signs of backing down. In fact, their behavior became increasingly aggressive. One of them barked orders at the volunteers, instructing them to stop what they were doing and stand still. Another demanded that everyone hand over their IDs, even though most of the group consisted of minors or elderly individuals who hadn't brought identification with them. It was chaos, pure and simple. Marcus tried to keep things under control, urging the volunteers to remain calm. "Don't argue with them," he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the commotion. "Just do what they say and stay safe." But inside he was seething. How could this be happening? Why was helping your own community viewed as suspicious? These questions swirled in his mind, fueling both his anger and his resolve. And then, just when it seemed like the situation couldn't get any worse, another vehicle entered the scene. A sleek black SUV with government plates pulled into the parking lot, its arrival announced by the soft crunch of tires on gravel. For a moment, everyone froze, unsure of who, or what, was about to emerge. Then the driver's door opened, and out stepped Governor Linda Hayes. Governor Hayes was a tall, poised woman in her late 50s, known for her no-nonsense approach to leadership. She had been scheduled to visit Jefferson Park later that afternoon to commend Marcus and his team for their efforts. However, due to a mix-up with her schedule, she had arrived hours earlier than expected. As she stepped out of the car, flanked by members of her security detail, she took in the scene before her with a mixture of confusion and concern. "What is going on here?" she asked, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Her gaze swept over the assembled officers, then landed squarely on Marcus. Without waiting for an answer, she strode forward, her heels clicking against the pavement. Reporters trailed. Behind her, cameras flashing as they captured every moment. The lead officer, caught off guard by her sudden appearance, stammered an explanation. "Ma'am, we're conducting an investigation into unauthorized activity," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the volunteers. "These individuals may not have proper clearance to organize such an event." Governor Hayes raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "Unauthorized activity?" she repeated, her tone dripping with disbelief. "Are you telling me that cleaning up a public park qualifies as unauthorized activity? Because if that's the case, I must have missed the memo." Her words hung in the air, silencing everyone, including the officers. For a brief moment, it felt as though the entire world had stopped moving. Then slowly, the governor turned to face Marcus. She extended her hand, offering him a warm smile. "Thank you for your hard work," she said sincerely. "You and your team are doing exactly what communities need more of." Marcus hesitated for a fraction of a second before shaking her hand. Relief washed over him, but it was tinged with bitterness. While the governor's intervention seemed to diffuse the immediate tension, he knew the underlying issue remained unresolved. This wasn't just about today. It was about years of systemic racism and bias that made moments like this all too common. Still, for the first time since the confrontation began, Marcus allowed himself to breathe a little easier. The governor's presence had shifted the power dynamic, forcing the officers to reconsider their actions. One by one, they began to retreat, muttering vague apologies as they returned to their vehicles. The crowd of onlookers erupted into cheers, celebrating the small victory even as they acknowledged the larger battle ahead. As the dust settled, Marcus looked around at the volunteers, who were slowly resuming their work. Their faces reflected a mix of emotions: relief, frustration, determination. Despite everything that had happened, they hadn't given up. They were still committed to making a difference, no matter how difficult the road might be. For Marcus, the day served as a reminder of both the challenges and the resilience of his community. Doing good wasn't always easy, especially when the world seemed determined to question your intentions. But as long as there were people willing to stand together to push back against injustice, there was hope. And hope, Marcus knew, was worth fighting for. The arrival of Governor Linda Hayes marked a turning point in the unfolding drama at Jefferson Park. Her commanding presence and sharp words immediately shifted the tone of the situation, forcing everyone, officers, volunteers, and onlookers, alike, to recalibrate their perspectives. For Marcus Johnson, who had spent the past hour feeling like he was under siege, the governor's intervention felt like a lifeline thrown into turbulent waters. Yet, even as the immediate threat began to recede, the weight of what had transpired lingered heavily in the air. Governor Hayes wasted no time asserting her authority. After shaking Marcus's hand and offering him a few words of encouragement, she turned her attention back to the officers, her expression stern. "Let me be very clear," she said, her voice firm and unyielding. "This is not an unauthorized activity. These individuals are doing exactly what we should all aspire to do, improving their community. If anything, you are the ones out of line here." Her statement sent ripples through the crowd. Some people gasped audibly, while others clapped and cheered. The officers, however, looked visibly uncomfortable. Officer Daniels, who had been leading the confrontation, shuffled his feet awkwardly, avoiding eye contact with the governor. Another officer muttered something under his breath before stepping away, presumably to radio headquarters for guidance. It was clear that none of them had anticipated this kind of pushback, not from someone as powerful and influential as Governor Hayes. For Marcus, watching the governor take charge was both empowering and surreal. On one hand, it was validating to see someone in a position of power recognize the injustice of the situation and call it out publicly. On the other hand, it was infuriating that such validation was necessary in the first place. Why did it take a high-profile figure to legitimize their efforts? Why couldn't they simply be allowed to do good without having to justify themselves? As the governor continued addressing the officers, reporters swarmed around her, microphones thrust forward eagerly. Cameras flashed nonstop, capturing every word and gesture. This wasn't just a local incident anymore. It was national news. Social media platforms buzzed with updates. Hashtags like Danju doing good while black and Dang community under attack spreading rapidly across timelines. People from all over the country chimed in, sharing stories of similar experiences where acts of kindness or leadership were met with suspicion because of race. One Twitter user wrote, "Why does doing good always come with conditions when you're black? Kudos to Outer Marcus J4 Change and everyone standing with him." Another posted, "This is why systemic racism runs so deep. Even cleaning up trash becomes suspicious if you're not white. Disgusting." The comments poured in relentlessly, amplifying the outrage and drawing attention to the broader issue at play. Back at the park, the governor wrapped up her conversation with the officers by issuing a pointed directive. "I want this matter resolved immediately," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "And I expect a full report on my desk by Monday morning explaining why resources were diverted to harass citizens instead of supporting them." With that, she dismissed the officers, who quickly retreated to their vehicles, clearly eager to escape the spotlight. Once the police presence diminished, Governor Hayes turned her focus to Marcus and the volunteers. She walked among them, shaking hands and thanking each person individually for their efforts. To the younger members of the group, she offered words of encouragement, telling them how proud they should be of themselves for stepping up and making a difference. When she reached Jamal, the teenager who had earlier been on the verge of tears, she knelt down to meet him at eye level. "Don't let anyone make you doubt your worth," she told him gently. "You're doing important work. Here." Her words brought a smile to Jamal's face, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. The fear and frustration he'd felt earlier still lingered, reminders of the harsh reality he and countless others like him faced daily. But for now, at least, there was a sense of relief. The governor's support had shifted the narrative, transforming what could have ended in disaster into a moment of triumph. As the cleanup resumed, Marcus found himself reflecting on the events of the day. He couldn't help but feel conflicted. On one hand, he was grateful for Governor Hayes' intervention. She had used her platform to amplify their cause and expose the biases that had nearly derailed their efforts. On the other hand, he couldn't shake the feeling that relying on external validation wasn't sustainable. What happened when there was no governor or celebrity around to speak up? Would they always need someone else to vouch for their right to exist and contribute? These thoughts weighed heavily on Marcus as he worked alongside the volunteers. Despite the earlier chaos, the group remained determined to finish what they had started. They filled bag after bag with trash, cleared weeds from the flower beds, and even scrubbed graffiti off the benches. By late afternoon, the park looked noticeably cleaner, a testament to their hard work and resilience. Throughout the day, strangers continued to trickle into the park, drawn by curiosity or solidarity. Some brought snacks and water bottles for the volunteers, while others joined in to help. A local artist set up an easel near the basketball court and began painting a mural inspired by the day's events. Titled "Resilience in Bloom," the artwork depicted a vibrant garden growing out of cracked concrete, symbolizing hope rising from adversity. As the colors came alive on the canvas, so too did the spirit of the community. By the time the sun dipped, below the horizon casting long shadows across the park, the cleanup was complete. Exhausted but satisfied, the volunteers gathered near the entrance for a final group photo. Governor Hayes joined them, posing proudly alongside Marcus and the rest of the team. Reporters snapped pictures, capturing smiles and laughter that belied the tension of earlier hours. In that moment, it felt like they had won, not just against the officers who had tried to shut them down, but against the system itself. But as Marcus stood there surrounded by friends, family, and supporters, he knew the fight wasn't over. The governor's presence had provided temporary protection, but lasting change required more than a single act of defiance. It required persistence, advocacy, and a collective effort to dismantle the structures that perpetuated inequality. And Marcus was ready to lead the charge. That evening, as he drove home, Marcus replayed the day's events in his mind. He thought about the officers' accusatory stares, the governor's defiant words, and the overwhelming support from strangers who had rallied behind them online and in person. He thought about Jamal, whose youthful idealism had been shaken but not broken, and about the mural that would soon become a permanent fixture in the park, a reminder of resilience and unity. Above all, Marcus thought about the future. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was determined to keep moving forward. Doing good might come with obstacles, especially for people who looked like him, but giving up was never an option. As he pulled into his driveway and stepped out of his car, Marcus whispered to himself, "They can try to stop us, but they'll never break us." With that resolve burning brightly within him, Marcus went inside, already planning his next steps. Tomorrow was another day, and there was still so much work to be done. The days following the Jefferson Park cleanup were a whirlwind for Marcus Johnson. What had started as a simple act of community service had spiraled into a national conversation about race, policing, and systemic injustice. The hashtag #DoingGoodWhileBlack trended on social media for nearly a week, sparking debates, personal stories, and calls for reform. For Marcus, the sudden attention was both overwhelming and enlightening. It forced him to confront not only the realities of his own experiences, but also the broader struggles faced by countless others who simply wanted to live, work, and contribute without fear of judgment or discrimination. That Monday morning, Marcus woke up to a flood of notifications on his phone. Messages poured in from friends, family, and even strangers thanking him for standing his ground and refusing to back down. Some shared their own stories of being profiled while volunteering, attending protests, or simply minding their business in predominantly white spaces. Others expressed outrage at how the officers had treated Marcus and his team, vowing to support any initiatives aimed at holding law enforcement accountable. Reading through these messages, Marcus felt a mix of emotions: gratitude for the solidarity, frustration at the need for it, and determination to turn this moment into meaningful action. At the same time, local news outlets picked up the story, amplifying its reach. Reporters reached out to Marcus for interviews, eager to hear his perspective on what had happened. At first, he hesitated. He wasn't seeking fame or recognition. All he'd wanted was to clean up a park. But after some thought, and encouragement from Governor Hayes, who called him personally to offer her support, he agreed to speak publicly. "If this can start a conversation," she told him over the phone, "then you owe it to yourself and your community to be part of it." His first interview aired that evening on a popular nightly news program. Sitting in front of the camera, dressed in a crisp button-down shirt and tie, Marcus spoke with quiet confidence. He recounted the events of that Saturday morning, describing how the officers' behavior had escalated unnecessarily and why it was so important to challenge such biases. "I wasn't doing anything wrong," he said, his voice steady. "I was helping my community, something I believe everyone has a responsibility to do, but because of the color of my skin, I was treated like a suspect instead of a citizen. That's not okay, and we have to talk about why that happens." His words resonated deeply with viewers. Calls poured into local government offices demanding accountability, and petitions circulated online calling for an investigation into the officers' conduct. Meanwhile, within the police department, internal reviews were launched to examine whether proper protocols had been followed during the incident. While Marcus knew that investigations often moved slowly and rarely resulted in significant consequences, he took solace in the fact that the issue was finally being acknowledged. As the days turned into weeks, Marcus found himself thrust into the spotlight. Invitations arrived from organizations and universities asking him to speak at conferences, panel discussions, and workshops. Some wanted him to share his story, while others hoped he could provide insights on combating systemic racism. Though flattered, Marcus approached these opportunities cautiously. He didn't want to become a token figurehead or lose sight of the work that truly mattered to him, uplifting his community. One invitation stood out among the rest, a request from a coalition of local leaders to collaborate on drafting legislation aimed at reforming how police responded to nonviolent community initiatives. This was something tangible, something that could create lasting change. Marcus accepted immediately, diving headfirst into meetings and brainstorming sessions. Together with activists, lawyers, and policymakers, he helped craft a proposal that emphasized transparency, accountability, and community engagement. Among its key provisions were requirements for officers to undergo bias training, clear guidelines for handling public gatherings, and mechanisms for residents to file complaints without fear of retaliation. While working on the legislative front, Marcus also decided to take matters into his own hands. Inspired by the success of the Jefferson Park cleanup and the outpouring of support it generated, he founded a nonprofit organization dedicated to empowering underserved neighborhoods. Named Bloom Where You're Planted, the organization focused on 3 core areas: education, environmental stewardship, and economic development. Through partnerships with schools, businesses, and other nonprofits, Marcus aimed to create sustainable programs that addressed root causes of inequality rather than just treating symptoms. The launch of Bloom Where You're Planted coincided with another cleanup event, this time at a different park across town. Word spread quickly, drawing hundreds of volunteers eager to participate. Local businesses donated supplies, musicians performed free concerts, and food trucks lined the streets, creating a festival-like atmosphere. It was a celebration of resilience, unity, and collective effort, a stark contrast to the tension that had defined the previous cleanup. Amidst the flurry of activity, Marcus made a point to check in with the original group of volunteers from Jefferson Park. Many of them had stayed involved, attending planning meetings and recruiting new members to join the cause. Jamal, the teenager who had been so shaken during the confrontation, emerged as a vocal advocate for youth leadership. He began organizing smaller projects in his own neighborhood, encouraging his peers to take ownership of their spaces. Watching him grow more confident filled Marcus with pride. It was proof that even small acts of resistance could inspire big changes. Of course, not everything went smoothly. There were moments when Marcus questioned whether he was making a difference or simply spinning his wheels. Pushback came from unexpected places, including critics who accused him of playing the victim or using the incident for personal gain. Some doubted the feasibility of his proposals, arguing that systemic issues were too complex to tackle directly. Others dismissed his efforts altogether, claiming that racism was no longer a significant barrier in modern society. These criticisms weighed on Marcus, especially late at night when the adrenaline wore off and exhaustion set in. But every time doubt crept in, he reminded himself of the faces he saw at each event, the children laughing as they picked up trash, the elders sharing, wisdom passed down through generations, the young adults stepping up to lead. They were living proof that progress was possible, even if it required patience and persistence. By the end of the month, Marcus realized that the journey ahead would be long and challenging. Systemic racism wasn't something that could be dismantled overnight. It was embedded in policies, practices, and mindsets that had existed for centuries. But he also knew that incremental victories mattered. Every mural painted, every bag of trash collected, every policy changed represented a step forward, a crack in the foundation of injustice. One evening, as he sat on his apartment balcony, watching the sunset, Marcus reflected on how far he'd come since that fateful Saturday morning. He thought about the officers who had tried to intimidate him, the governor who had stepped in to defend him, and the thousands of people who had rallied behind him. Most importantly, he thought about the future, not just his own, but the future of the community he loved so dearly. "We've got a lot of work to do," he murmured to himself, gazing out at the city skyline. But we're not alone. And as long as we keep pushing, keep believing, we'll get there. With that thought, Marcus smiled softly, feeling a renewed sense of purpose wash over him. The road might be tough, but he was ready to walk it, one step at a time. Months had passed since the Jefferson Park cleanup, and Marcus Johnson's life had transformed in ways he never could have imagined. What began as a single act of kindness had grown into a movement, a testament to the power of resilience, community, and collective action. The challenges Marcus faced that day in the park hadn't disappeared. They were still deeply embedded in society's fabric. But instead of letting those challenges defeat him, Marcus used them as fuel to drive change. Every setback became an opportunity, every obstacle a chance to grow stronger. By now, Bloom Where You're Planted had gained significant traction. The nonprofit organization wasn't just a passion project anymore. It was a force for good, impacting lives across the city and beyond. Through partnerships with schools, local businesses, and government agencies, Marcus and his team launched programs that addressed critical issues like environmental sustainability, educational equity, and economic empowerment. They hosted workshops teaching young people how to advocate for themselves, organized job fairs connecting residents with employment opportunities, and even started urban gardening projects to promote food security in underserved neighborhoods. One of their most successful initiatives was the Community Leaders Program, designed to mentor teenagers and young adults who wanted to make a difference in their communities. Jamal, the once shy teenager from Jefferson Park, became one of the program's first participants, and later, one of its star mentors. Under Marcus's guidance, Jamal developed leadership skills and confidence, eventually spearheading his own projects. His work earned recognition not only locally but also nationally, inspiring other young people to step up and take charge. Meanwhile, the legislative proposal Marcus helped draft gained momentum. After months of advocacy, negotiation, and public hearings, key provisions of the bill were adopted by the state legislature. While it wasn't everything Marcus had hoped for, some compromises had to be made. It marked a significant step toward reforming police practices and fostering better relationships between law enforcement and marginalized communities. Governor Hayes played a pivotal role in pushing the legislation forward, often citing Marcus's story as proof that policy changes could save lives and restore trust. As word of Marcus's efforts spread, invitations poured in from across the country. Universities invited him to deliver commencement speeches, community organizations asked him to lead training sessions, and national conferences requested him as a keynote speaker. At first, Marcus worried that traveling so much might distract him from his grassroots work. But he soon realized that sharing his story on larger platforms allowed him to amplify the voices of those who couldn't speak for themselves. Each speech, each panel discussion, each interview became an opportunity to shine a light on systemic racism and inspire others to join the fight for justice. One particularly memorable event took place at a prestigious university in New York City. Standing before a packed auditorium, Marcus recounted the events of that fateful Saturday morning in Jefferson Park. He spoke about the fear he felt when surrounded by officers, the frustration of being questioned for simply doing good, and the hope that blossomed when strangers rallied behind him online and in person. "I didn't ask to become a symbol," he admitted, his voice steady yet filled with emotion. "But if my experience can help someone else feel less alone, if it can push us closer to a world where no one has to justify their existence while trying to improve their community, then I'll keep telling this story until we get there." The audience erupted into applause, many standing to cheer. Among them was a young woman named Tasha, who approached Marcus after the talk. She shared her own story of being profiled during a volunteer trip to rebuild homes in a hurricane-ravaged area. "Your words gave me strength," she told him, tears glistening in her eyes. "I thought I was the only one who felt this way. Knowing that others are fighting too, it means everything." Moments like these reminded Marcus why he kept going, even when the road felt impossibly long. Back home, the mural painted by the local artist during the cleanup had become a landmark in Jefferson Park, Titled Resilience in Bloom, it served as both a tribute to the volunteers' hard work and a reminder of the challenges they overcame together. Families posed for photos in front of it, couples carved their initials into its base, and children traced their hands along its vibrant colors. It was more than art. It was a symbol of hope, unity, and resistance against injustice. Marcus often visited the park to reflect, sometimes sitting on a bench near the mural or walking along the newly restored pathways. On one such afternoon, he noticed a familiar face approaching him. It was Governor Hayes, dressed casually in jeans and a blazer, carrying a reusable water bottle and gloves. "Mind if I join you?" she asked with a warm smile. Marcus grinned, gesturing for her to sit beside him. "Of course not," he replied. "We've got plenty of trash bags left." Together, they spent the next hour picking up litter around the park, chatting about everything from upcoming policy initiatives to their shared love of gardening. For Marcus, it was a surreal yet comforting moment. Here was someone in a position of immense power choosing to roll up her sleeves and contribute, not because cameras were rolling or reporters were watching, but because she genuinely cared. It was a reminder that allyship, when genuine, could bridge divides and create lasting connections. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden hues across the park, Marcus paused to take it all in. The laughter of children playing nearby, the hum of conversation among families enjoying picnics, the quiet rustle of leaves swaying in the breeze, all of it felt like a victory. Not the kind celebrated with fireworks or parades, but the kind born from persistence, courage, and unwavering belief in the possibility of a better future. That night, as he drove home, Marcus reflected on how far he'd come since that tense morning months ago. He thought about the officers who had doubted him, the governor who had defended him, and the countless individuals who had supported him along the way. Most importantly, he thought about the community, the people who refused to let fear dictate their actions, who chose compassion over cynicism, and who proved time and again that doing good was worth every challenge. For Marcus, the journey was far from over. There would always be obstacles to overcome, battles to fight, and injustices to confront. But he knew one thing for certain: he wasn't alone. Together with allies old and new, he and his community would continue planting seeds of change, seeds that would grow into something beautiful, resilient, and unstoppable. As he pulled into his driveway and stepped out of his car, Marcus whispered to himself, "We're just getting started." And with that, he headed inside, ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring.